Atlanta is the site of one of the highest profile organized crime and RICO-related cases in the nation, that being the internationally renowned musician known as Young Thug, real name Jeffrey Williams. Earlier in November, after almost 10 months, believe it or not, 10 months of jury selection and the screening process, a jury of 12 jurors and 6 alternates were finally seated. And opening statements are set to begin on November 27th, I should say. And we are joined on this edition of Atlanta News First. And Atlanta News First investigates behind the investigation by a man known as the Jury Whisperer. He is Mark Calzaretta. He is a jury consultant and founding partner of Magna Legal Services, if I can say it properly. I got your name right. I didn't get the name of the company right.
That's right.
But how do you become a jury whisperer? Fox News, I believe, dubbed you that very colorful title. How did that come about?
So it wasn't my idea, for sure. So I like to try to stay under the radar a little bit more. And I think any jury consultant, you kind of want to meld into the courtroom. You don't want to sort of be out there. So, but I certainly am happy, that people think of me in that regard, that they'll call me that. I fell into this. That's essentially, if you're asking how I got involved in this. But I've been a jury consultant or trial consultant since the mid '90s, and back then it was in its infancy. Jury research, jury consulting, things like that came out of market research. Just a little history on it, and you couldn't go to school for it. Now there's PhD programs for it and things like that. And I just happened to go to school for psychology and was trying to, like many other people who, exit out of college with not a great plan, kind of fell into it, and happened to really enjoy it, still enjoy it and love it to this day. Back in 2007, I founded Magna, to kind of really specialize in the type of research that we do, which is a little unique, in the sense of we've been very lucky to have our clients to engage in a very deep and meaningful level, and in different ways very early on in litigation. So it gives a very broad perspective, allows us to run a ton of research to really, really dissect cases, dissect how people perceive things, how people make decisions. All this related to, obviously, in the courtroom and in trials and cases. So I've just been kind of blessed, to be totally honest with you, and I've been lucky that I found something that I love to do that I'm also happen to be okay at. So it's a win-win.
So your firm does mock trials, jury consultation, relating this to kind of a pop cultural field. In fact, is this the field that Dr. Phil McGraw began his career in?
It is, in fact.
Went on to have a TV series for a few years called Bull on CBS, which is our network. Is this the same kind of work that he began his career doing?
Correct. Yeah, he had a firm based out of Texas, and it's the same exact type of work that Dr. Phil did, and that's the type of work, and it's evolved tremendously over the years, and the approach and just how much we can really dial in what we know and what we believe is going to be the outcome of a given piece of litigation and or a trial, and what the likelihood is for what I would say is to understand what the associated risk is with a given lawsuit or a piece of litigation or case.
Here in Atlanta, as I said earlier, it has been the longest jury selection process in Georgia history, maybe one of the longest in the nation. Started in January and ended just in early November, kind of with a jolt, because we fully expected on the day that a jury was finally seated on the court calendar, Judge Glanville was going to hear motions regarding the use of rap lyrics in the criminal trial. And then all of a sudden he began seating the jury, saying he was ready to get this trial started. Why did it take so long to select a jury for this trial? It's obviously an incredibly complex trial.
You know, this is pretty unusual. I mean, you kind of hit on it. Typically, I mean, there's been long trials. There's been RICO trials. You know, I mean, my name's Calzaretta. I'm Italian. I'm from New Jersey, so you know, pretty familiar with RICO trials up here in New Jersey, New York, and what have you. And some of the most famous ones, right? They've made movies about them. And you got Gotti and whatever else, you know. And in fact, my wife was watching the Netflix series just the other night when I came home from a trial. I said, I can't get away from trials here, even in my own house. But, you know, it can take a long time. When you have a complex case and you have complexities that certainly here when you have a recognized, a famous figure, right? And you add that into the mix, and then you add into obviously this is RICO, and there's you have all of the gang related issues that are in play here. That process can take a long time, because as they're weeding through people, I mean, some of the other famous trials from other RICO trials, I mean, just to get people on the jury, people were fearful to be on the jury, right? Like, I mean, I'm not saying that people had expressed that necessarily here or have something to fear. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm suggesting is when you get into RICO, get into gangs, you get into organized crime, people show up, you're getting, depends, but it's $5 and a sandwich for the day for showing up for jury selection. It's a civil duty. It's a great experience, but also people have their own lives. They have things that they worry about, concerns. They go through that, what they call that hardship process, right? Which the hardship process can take an inordinate amount of time. I've been on trials that were going to last 7 months, and it took us, a long time, a month, to pick a jury on a case that no one would know about, just because of, hey, this is going to be a long time. It's going to take a lot of your, personal time. And then you layer in the RICO aspect, organized crime, those types of things, and people, for hardship reasons. And then you move on to like for cause, which is like if either side thinks that they're inappropriate to sit on this jury or not appropriate. I don't mean that the people are inappropriate or act inappropriately, but based on their backgrounds. People use things like bias as a bad word. In a jury selection process, bias is not bad. I can use like an example like this. Like, for example, if the Yankees are playing the Red Sox, I don't know, or the Mets are playing the Braves, let's go with something a little more hometown for you. If you're a Braves fan, you don't want the number one Yankees fan being the umpire of that game, right? It's just, right, that's bias. Okay, now that doesn't mean that same umpire who's a Mets fan, is a Mets fan at the Braves game, right, can't go and call like another game, like for the Mariners or something like that, right? Doesn't care as much. So when we talk about bias, like it's those types of things, that's when you move people for cause, right? Like they believe that there's an inherent bias that makes them predisposed or predetermined for feeling one way or another. So understanding that when you have a RICO case, then you layer in someone who's famous, you have the local ties to Atlanta and so on and so forth. and the culture there, and the community, and so on and so forth. It's still surprising that it takes that long, but I mean, it can take a long time. And then, people might not be comfortable, and you move into individualized voir dire, for example, where they're interviewing people or questionnaires, and you start laying all this. It just can take a long time. This is unusual.
What you said a moment ago was fascinating, because you mentioned the word bias and how when you're selecting a jury, maybe that's not a bad thing. When we were live streaming the actual jury seating process, there was a lot of dead air. We had cameras just focusing on individual attorneys who were striking jurors from their notes and everything. And we think about an impartial jury, but attorneys and prosecutors really don't want an impartial jury. Don't they want a panel selected of jurors who they think are going to be more favorable to their case, as opposed to straight impartiality or neutrality? Is that correct?
I think that the term impartial, what they don't want, they want someone that's gonna be more in their favor. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You want people that are gonna see things from your lens, right? That are gonna view things the way that you want them to view things, that are favorable for you to win. The outcome, the goal here is to win, right? And but what you don't want is, you don't want impropriety, obviously. Like somebody on that jury, no lawyer wants to have someone on there that shouldn't be on there, that's going to cause a mistrial somewhere along the way, or could, right? So there's a fine line there, there's a tipping point there. But certainly you want someone that's favorable. You want to pick people, and that gets into profiling, which is we do that often. You create, as a jury consultant, you're creating a profile. Generally, though, it's a deselection process. So when you talk about impartiality, what you're more concerned with as a lawyer or jury consultant or what have you, when you're this whole notion of selecting a jury, you are not selecting it, you are deselecting the jurors. And so that's just sort of a twist, a play on the word, but it's really what you're doing. What you want to do is get the people off that are not good for your case, right? And in that sense, that's where they get to the impartiality. So if you take people that are on the extremes, one side or the other, to be honest, just to be frank, like you can tell those people generally, both sides can. They can tell the people that are really great for them and the people that are really awful for them. It's the people on the margins, like in between, that's where the magic and that's where the art really comes into. There is because it's the people that you're not exactly, that don't present themselves in a way or have something that's so obvious that that's bad. Like, for example, somebody said that they were in a gang. I don't know. Like obviously you don't want somebody on there. They're not on there anymore, but probably one person would say, hey, that would make them be a little more, have be a little bit maybe towards the defense side. Let's just say if they had that in their background or understand more of the criminal organization because they had that in their past, right? It's those types of things. That's obvious, right? That's really obvious. It's the other stuff and the nuances in the middle there that you're trying to figure out which way are those people going to go. And as they swing more towards the middle, it gets harder and harder because then it's like, well, where does this person go? Which side, And so that's where you have data. That's where you have backgrounds, research. There's a plethora of public information that you can pull on people that you can't ask questions in the courtroom and that kind of a thing, that you really, with social media, you can have a real good presence and understanding of the people without having to poke and prod around sensitive areas. But in a case like this, the voir dire has got to get into these issues. So
when you are deselecting a jury,
mm-hmm.
Which is what we're talking about rather than selecting. But when you're deselecting and you have your final panel of 10 and 6 alternates or whatever, can you predict how a juror on a panel will act during the course of a trial? Judge Juror Glanville has been very strict and very diligent in handing down contempt of court orders against potential jurors who didn't follow his instructions, who posted on social media and did inappropriate things. And we heard his admonitions to the jury, to the final panel, before he dismissed them until November 27th, when opening statements are set to begin. Do you have an idea, or can you predict if a juror is going to cause problems and then all of a sudden you have a mistrial? Can you predict that?
I don't know if you can really predict like every little bit of human tendency or behavior or things of that nature, especially when it comes to like if they're going to violate the court rules. You certainly could have a better idea based on their social media profiles and that the background research that I was just talking about. That is, by the way, totally ethical and it's all public information, and you readily pull it on the prospective jurors. But I don't know that you could really predict that. Now, I will say that there have been plenty of times where I've been in a jury selection, and I've had a lawyer, a client, it turned to me and say, "We got to get rid of this person," and I'd tell them, "Leave them." But they're like, "They're terrible for us." I'm like, "Agreed. They are not good for us." Is it? But they're not making it through the trial. They're going to do something strange in court, and they're going to get bounced off the jury. And we need to save our strike for someone else over here. That person's not going to. And one of the most interesting anecdotal stories that I have from jury selection is in New York. In fact, that was a situation. And on the first day after opening statements, the individual went up and hugged the plaintiff in the case and said, "I am so sorry. I'm totally on your side," in front of the judge and everybody else, and got bounced on the first day. They looked at me, and I guess that could be where this jury whisperer type thing starts coming from, but it's like those type of anecdotal stories. Now I'm not that good. I couldn't have predicted basically on the openings, right after the openings, the person would be out. But they had social cue issues that were pretty evident that I didn't think that they would be able to control themselves throughout, a 4-week trial in the courtroom. And so eventually they would have to be excused, and there's always alternates. So I don't know that you can predict it, but based on you certainly can have your hunches. And things like that related to your question. So
This is obviously a high-profile trial. It has to do with hip-hop music, rap music, whichever term you like to apply. There are going to be some very high-profile witnesses that are going to be called. There's going to be some testimony. We've already seen one of the co-defendants the day after the jury was seated reached a plea deal. There may be more. What are some of the stresses that jurors are going to feel over the course of a trial that's probably going to last the better part of 2024? Judge Glanville has already said, stay off social media. Don't talk about this trial with anyone. This is your primary job for the next how many ever months. That's got to put a lot of stress.
It's a big ask.
A juror. It's got to be just enormous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big ask. This is not your typical. We already discussed. Everybody's a little different, right? People deal with stress differently. People perceive things differently. They have different levels of like sort of acceptable levels, and certainly react different ways. But this is obviously deals with some serious issues. If you're talking about gangs and things like that, you're talking about violence and things like that, like things that certainly I think have the potential to be scary for folks. Then you layer in the personal impact that this will have, just the time. Forget about what the subject matter is. It's a year of your life that you're showing up and you're putting everything on pause. And then all of the other things like the social media things, right? It's a big ask because, what if it's like they have grandkids, friends, family, they communicate. So you're asking people to, and And depending upon for certain people, I mean, you go back to even COVID, if you think about that as an example, how people were struggling going from being social to like being locked in, like sort of locked in, here being, they're not quite sequestered, but, if something starts to go off the rails, there's, right, that you've seen jurors that were sequestered before. I mean, the OJ trial, right? They were completely sequestered. There's been other trials. It's rare, but they'll do that if they need to. But that was also a different time. You didn't have social media. So I think the anxiety levels for people will be high. I think it'll just like anything else, it'll ebb and flow depending upon what's going on. Jurors generally forget about whatever case it is. What frustrates jurors, and from what we do is a lot of times you're allowed to do in many jurisdictions post-juror interviews after a trial, so you can actually interview the jurors and ask them questions. Sure, in your line of work, you've seen where, like, on different shows where after big trials, they get the jurors together and they interview them as to why, you see it on those like 48 hours or ID discovery, like all those kind of shows about, those types of things, a lot of different criminal trials. But it's an interesting thing what they're going to have to go through over the next whatever dozens of months, and what's being asked of them. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot for these jurors. There's no doubt about it. So,
is it even feasible in today's environment to sequester a jury? Is that even possible anymore?
Yeah, it's possible. And like, to go back, I realized I probably didn't complete the thought. After we interview jurors, the thing that frustrates them is wasting their time during the trial. That is the number one thing. So if this thing can get done in 4 months and it drags out to 12, people's anxiety tolerance for all this stuff is gonna, to go back to complete the thought. And sorry, what was can you sequester them, right?
It's possible, even feasible with social media, cell phones, Wi-Fi. Is that even feasible anymore?
I mean, it's feasible. It's just more difficult than it ever has been before, right? I mean, look, before, if a juror was, if a juror was, going to walk in and out of the courtroom, and you're in Atlanta or New York or wherever, just a metropolitan city, and you walk by one of the little newsstands and all the newspapers are out there, and and you can't even look at the because maybe the case is on the front page, right? But that you could try to avoid. Here, there's so much with our cell phones and just everything that pops up in ads and things like that. Just even if you're not trying to look at something, you never know what's going to pop up right on your feed. So it's just much more challenging. Can it be done? Yes, they can be sequestered. It's just more challenging because of the world we live in with the technology and all of the information overload that we have these days. It's more difficult.
Mark, this has been a fascinating conversation. Mark Calzaretta, founding partner of Magna Legal Services. You do mock trials, jury consultation. We're wrapping up this podcast and the special edition podcast on Atlanta News First regarding the upcoming RICO organized crime trial of one of American music's most celebrated artists, that being Young Thug, multi-time Grammy Award winner, multi-time American Music Award winner. Final thoughts. What are some of the aspects of the jury trial that we should be looking out for in the coming months? Not necessarily legal strategies, but just in terms of the jury itself. What are some things we need to be watching for?
So I think openings are critically important to cases. Openings set the tone, and there's a lot of studies out there that say 80% or 80% of jurors, the way that they exit the opening, so their verdict orientation, so which side they're leaning towards more, 80% of them decide that after openings, and it sticks. So to watch the openings and to watch the jurors' potential reactions to the openings, I think is critical. Openings are really, really important. And then witnesses, how the jurors, like, what is the testimony Are jurors, like, what are the jurors' body language? Are the jurors leaning up and paying attention? Are they taking notes for particular witnesses and not for others? When one side gets up one lawyer, do they tend to perk up a little and pay more attention? Maybe they don't for others. So you'll start, and that might not be in the beginning, but as this long process goes on, those are the things to kind of look out for. And then these potential improprieties. Let's just say that something happens with a juror. They'll have alternates and things like that. You always have alternates on juries, just in case something, someone could get sick, something can happen. It doesn't always have to be something that they do wrong, right? Somebody could have a medical emergency, God forbid, and they need to be excused or from the jury. So, but those are some of the things that look out for. This is a marathon, not a sprint. That's the other part. That's what this is going to be. There's going to be days where it's like watching paint dry. I'm sure, there's going to be other days where it's going to be like fireworks. And it's going to be a long process.
Those are all the things that we're going to be continuing to focus here on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com. We will be broadcasting the trial on our YouTube stream and on our live stream on AtlantaNewsFirst.com. Thanks to Mark Calzaretta, founding partner of Magna Legal Services. Stay with us for all of the latest developments in the historic organized crime trial of Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug, right here on Atlanta News First.